what was a stark reminder or just a shock that I had this baby and I'm at the top of my company and I'm struggling.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to Truth Works, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change? I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Truth Works. I am here with a fantastic guest today. And I'll just say my co-host, Patty, she's out again. I love you, Patty. Miss you. But exciting, I have Danaya here. And Danaya Wilson is the co-founder and CEO of a company that is called Better Certify. But what I'm excited about is just your story. Your story is kind of interesting. Like you graduate in 2007. It's a financial crisis and recession. You can't find work. Your family has a business that's in sort of the hazmat, dangerous materials world. So you go and work for them, and then you kind of have this aha, right, about all the training that has to happen. And I guess you start this company. So tell us about you. Like, I'm sure there's more to that story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thank you for having me on. I definitely appreciate it. I have a very unique career path and is really founded on this basis of the being a master of the pivot. You know, if something doesn't work in this area, then figuring out how I could change systems or even just change my preferences to be able to find something that does work. And that was the first lesson I learned when graduating in 2007 with my undergrad. And it was just one of the worst times to graduate.
It really was. It was terrible.
So bad. And I feel for, college graduates right now because I can imagine they're probably feeling the same thing. Like the economic climate is really scary. And I looked low and high for a new career, and my parents just happened to be in a career change and were starting up a hazardous material abatement firm. And one thing that I'm very good at is looking at complex systems and making them easier and digestible. And it seems like hazardous material, as you would expect, has a lot of regulations. So it has a lot of complexity with it. And I found something that I was good at, possibly not passionate about in the sense of like, I'm not really passionate about hazardous material. Probably not a lot of people are. But I was able to find a place that I could use my strengths, even though it wasn't in something that I thought I was going to do.
Right. Which I think it's kind of interesting because I think a lot of people kind of get stuck in that, like, well, I'm not that passionate about it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's opportunity everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people miss it all the time. And here you are, young, right? Just graduating. And maybe because you were young and had just graduated, you didn't have sort of the fear and preconceived notions that a lot of people maybe have as they get further along in their career. You just kind of did it.
Yeah, you looked in my case, I definitely looked for where can I create impact? So that is what I found that I am passionate about. While I may not be passionate about the subject matter, I'm very passionate about impact. And that's expanded throughout my career. And now I'm at the point where the company, instead of working with my parents, I started my own company, Better Certify, 10 years ago, that still focuses on the hazardous material and the trades industries, but looking at it from like the education side of it. So what do these individuals need to do? And how do we translate that into a language that they can understand and find relevant in a classroom when they're learning about it outside of where they're actually going to be doing the work? So when we're talking about plumbers and tradespeople, what does it look like to talk about situations that we can't really emulate, we can't really show in a classroom environment? And that translation takes a little bit of finesse and education. And I found that we are really passionate about that. How do we make this complexity feel approachable?
Yeah. And so tell us, like, you start the company, you get it going, it's successful, then you're a mom, and now what?
I started the company and then about 2 years ago, so our company just turned 10, and 2 years ago, I had a child, I had a baby girl, and I really wanted to start a family, and I thought that that was the perfect timing, that if you're later in life starting a family, you're like, "Okay, I can outthink all of these barriers that I know women face when having children," and what was a stark reminder is or just a shock that I had this baby and I'm at the top of my company and really performing well in my industry. So, doing really well in my industry as well. And I'm struggling.
Hmm.
I have the controls and the ability to give myself a day off or, maybe start something a little bit later and I'm really struggling. And that it's almost like, like you said, an aha moment where I was like, if this is difficult for me, then this is difficult for and 10 times more difficult for the vast majority of women, for the vast majority of parents. And how do we ensure that this is not the burden that we're passing on to our children?
Yeah, no, it's something that I think about a ton. So I have a 5-year-old, and when I had him, I was the CHRO of Netflix. Very big job, 10,000 people all over the world, plus all of our productions, which is a lot more people. And so I had this really big job and I had this baby who was early. So we were in the NICU, and I'm on the phone with work in the NICU. Like I didn't, I had maternity leave, but I was out, but still involved some,
Mhm.
and then I came back. I was out for 3 months and I came back, and then 2 weeks later we went into lockdown because it was the pandemic. And it was terrible. It was
Mhm.
terrible. I can't have a nanny because nobody could, whatever. So I had no help. I had this big, huge job trying to get everybody to, work from home and try to get our productions back up and running, right? And not sleeping.
Mhm.
um, and it was terrible. And I had a very similar thought of like this I don't know, nobody this is so hard. Like how do women do this, right? And I had tons of resources just like you did. I could take days off, I could
Mhm.
hire help. But it was still a huge burden, right? And then you look at women who have families, right, and children, and they have very high level jobs, right, or not, and then they leave the workforce,
Mhm.
altogether. And, I didn't leave the work. I'm still working, but I, there was sort of a period of time when my kid was about 2 and I was starting to leave Netflix. I was like, I don't want to travel around the world and be gone 3 weeks out of the month and not see my kid. Like
Mhm.
I want a job where I can see him walk and do the things that he's doing, right? And I had gotten that opportunity because of COVID, right? Had it not been for COVID, I would have been on the road and I would have missed a lot of those things. So I think the perspective that you get after you have a child, because I thought it would be easy too. Similar to you, like
Yeah.
I got this figured out. It's fine.
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
I have the finances, right? So I can hire help or I can lean into the systems around us that provide for that. But then what we don't acknowledge is the highly emotional side of things. Even if you have the system, you have the guilt that's on the other side of it that prevents you from using the system. There's, even research showing that in states that do have maternity leave, women are leaving these hours on the table. And a
Hmm.
lot of that, I'm like, I know 100% why that's the case. It's because the workforce expects you to come back to work the way you were after having a kid, but you're not the same. You're completely different. And what you really need is flexibility and understanding and autonomy to be able to work in a manner that is still productive because at the end of the day, we both understand dollars matter, right? But also with the flexibility that respects respects your newfound position as a mother, as a parent. And I think that that's really where I started to, why I wrote this book, Changemakers Wanted, and why I started doing the research for it, because I didn't want to just accept the answer that there's not more women in leadership positions. So I'm in a male dominated industry, construction. Right now, actually, I just earlier this year, I was saying about 18%. We passed a 20% mile marker. So we're now at 20% where there's women in the industry, but still
That's not a lot.
unbelievably, yeah, it's still unbelievably low, right?
Yeah.
And that's 18% to 20% took 10 years. So,
Right.
it's certainly nothing to write home about. But anyway, I'm in a male dominated industry and I'm looking around me and there's not a lot of women sitting at the table. So I really wanted to say, okay, what would it look like if I could change anything? What would it look like to get more women into these positions, not just sitting at the table, but actually in leadership positions? And that's what the premise of the book was, and really diving into that. And ultimately, what it came down to, which you need more flexibility. If we're not going to give women flexibility, then we're not going to have women come back from giving birth.
Yeah. I know. And it was something that I thought a lot about when I was in that seat at Netflix. Like, how can I make this better?
Mhm.
And there's no obvious answer. Like, we've thought about bring childcare in, but that's complicated and doesn't always help. You give more money to families that, and women in the, here's some extra money to,
Mhm.
hire the nanny or pay for childcare. And then childcare costs have just been going up and up and up. But there's also this thing that you said is like, you don't come back the same, but
Mhm.
the workplace expects you to,
Yep.
right? And I wonder if, I don't know how you feel about this, but I wonder if that's almost a place to start.
100%. So when you're standing at the foot of this mountain that needs to be scaled to a certain extent, what we really need, and that's essentially what I found through the book, is more individuals that are going through the same problem, maybe not problem, but experience, to be able to communicate and weigh into this. Because if we're just maybe taking a top down approach and we're looking at key decision makers at the company, a lot of times individuals that are in the C suite have been removed from having children for 5 to 10 plus years. And so,
Or they're
looking,
men.
or they're men, exactly, and not able to make that decision of what it looks like to still be breastfeeding and pumping and what that feels like to be in a meeting and being distracted about what's going on physiologically in your body
Am I
and having to
leaking?
show up
Yeah.
100%. And like those are very real
Yeah.
conversations, and it almost seems like people don't want to talk about it because essentially, like, you had your kid, you had your time. Your time was off, when you were outside on maternity leave, or even if you got maternity leave. Now come back to the work and perform and be present the way that we need you to be. And the truth is, it's just not the case.
And the thing is like, yes, you're not the same, and maybe you're not present the same way you were. That doesn't mean that you're not doing a great job.
You need to get a job done. Get
Yeah,
moms.
right. Let's talk about the book because I don't even think we've mentioned the title,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it's called Changemakers, right?
Yeah, Changemakers Wanted.
Yeah. And I will take us through the like, hey, I'm going to write a book process. I mean, like, what happened?
Yeah, it was especially having a 2-year-old, right? Like, so I
Yeah.
started that she was just over a 1 when I started the process, and I do think a few people were looking at me like,
Are you
"Oh."
crazy?
Yeah, exactly. And I very much, me and my husband, we talked about it, and he was like, "Would you regret it if you passed this opportunity up?" And I was like, "You know what? I would. I would
Yeah.
regret it." And I think that sometimes when you're at the wire, down to the wire, and you're like, it would be so much easier not to do this, that pushing through what's difficult, what's hard, what's gritty tends to produce the best fruit, especially for me. And so once I signed on to do that, I was very motivated to get it done. And then spending the time every weekend, I was writing close to 5,000 words to be able to get it done as quickly as I wanted to do it. And I knew that At the time I started writing it, I didn't know what the political landscape was going to be. That was before we knew that there was maybe even going to be like Kamala running against Trump. We were still well into the tier or the last tier of Biden's presidency, but I knew that this was a difficult um, election year, and I knew that women would be feeling the brunt of what decision would be made just because of how things have been going the last few years. And I wanted to inject some hope in a really confusing and convoluted world. And so I wanted to publish the book as close as I could to election day. And that required that weekends, I wasn't hanging out with my family. And so that was definitely the hardest thing I've ever done because it's
Mhm.
hard to explain, like, mommy has to work, mommy needs
Mhm.
to do this, mommy gets to write a book. I will say there's a really exciting moment when the book came out and she sees my picture on the inside cover and she's like, "This is mommy's book." That feels really good. And when she opens other books and she's like, "This is not mommy."
Yeah, don't read that one. It's not
Yeah.
mommy's book. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have the same challenges where, I'm working and my kid said to me, because I missed something, he's like, well, you shouldn't have had that meeting. And I was like, well, yes, I guess. But at the same time, I have to. Right.
Yeah.
And I do. I think the challenge is like, I love what I do. Like,
Yes.
and now I'm an investor in companies and getting to meet all these entrepreneurs and talk about disruption and things that can like impact the world. But I also love him, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I love being a mom. And it's probably being a mom is like the best job I've ever had, I'd say. But at the same time, if I only was that, I would be missing out on all this other stuff that also gives me joy.
Yes.
So how did you like navigate that?
Isn't that just interesting to sit with for a little bit that women can be multidimensional, right? Like we don't have to just enjoy one side of it. And I think with some of the stuff that has been coming out, it's almost like, well, we need more women to have babies and we need more women to if childcare is so expensive, then how do we get more women to stay home as opposed to being in the workforce? And I I struggle with that because I'm very much like that. I want to be both. I wanna be
Mhm,
a mother and I wanna be a contributor outside of the home, and I think that that's the important part that we don't progress is that ability to be able to choose and stand right in that, and I think we really wanna focus on that if we support individuals and we give them the tools that they need to be able to have happy and healthy families as well as to preserve their personal and mental well-being, then we don't have to focus so heavily on the incentives to get them to live to do these things. And so I'm very blessed in the sense that I have the autonomy, right? Like
mhm,
and I've been able to make those decisions to pivot in situations where I don't feel that it's helping me live the life that I want to live. The other side of it is and I get asked this question a lot about like what does women's empowerment look like to you? And I think there's a lot of focus on women. A lot of it has come internally in the sense of I am so willing to work unbelievably hard to be able to shape the life that I want, to shape the world that I want to be present in. And I'm willing to take on maybe a little bit more personal societal responsibility than maybe might be healthy. I don't know. But what I do is I definitely take up that charge, and I find that women are like that. We're these almost so mavericks in the case that we're shifting things around. I mean, the amount of stuff that I see my colleagues and my other parents doing when it comes to just navigating a weekend schedule with sports, right? And like this is a master class in Tetris and logistics and
totally.
you're just sitting there watching that, and you know who's doing that, it's moms, and they're so unbelievably amazing, and so how do we change our organizational systems to where we're benefiting this amazing amount of, talent that parents
Mhm,
are bringing to the table in the first place? There's one other thing that I wanted to touch base on because you were talking about, your son being like, well, you shouldn't have that meeting.
Yeah.
And what we teach our children
And
right
it,
now
like,
is,
was gut-wrenching. I was like,
oh,
"Oh."
right? And you're like, almost to a sense, you're like, to a sense, you're like, fair, right? Like, I would love not to do this, like,
Right.
that'd be great to hang out with you. But we're teaching our children that, like, work is where mommy and daddy go to be away from our children.
Mhm.
And then at one day they too can get this lovely gift of having to work, and they have to be away from what they want to do. And one of the companies that I profiled in the book was Patagonia, and Patagonia has had on-site childcare since 1984.
Yeah.
And what if you really look into that, what they found that works is that the parents and the children go to work together. They go to this structure together, and the children go do their work, their
Mhm.
contribution, and the parents go do their work. And they're able to communicate and engage with each other throughout the day. And I almost think of, if we're able to teach our children that work and school are not just the separation of being, but instead this community, what we each do. I tell my daughter, like, you going to school allows me to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And we continue to have this conversation because it's this community that we're investing in, and this future of, collaboration. That's not just because we separate and we have to go, do things we don't want to do. This is very much what we want to do, but how do we make that to where there's engagement as opposed to disassociation?
No, I love that, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I am guilty of this, and I don't know whether it's because I am a woman, but I also don't ask for help,
Yeah.
and I think,
Yeah.
a lot of women don't.
There's conflicting reasons why, right? Like, you have the guilt side of things.
Yeah.
So there's that, and that's predicated by all these should statements. Well, I should be able to do this. Why am I having trouble doing this? And then that's supported by all this, the graphics and the other sides of the memes where it's like, well, I have no trouble doing this. You have the trad wife movement kind of going through, and it's like, well, there's examples of women that can do it all, so why can't you? Then there's the other side of it where, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure you feel the same. We genuinely enjoy what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
Like, I very much enjoy taking care of my daughter. I love packing her clothes. I love
Yeah.
getting stuff ready for her. And so I don't want help with the stuff that I love. What
Yeah.
I want are all those little things that we women do. One tiny example was we got new vitamins. We have like a vitamin subscription, and the new ones came in. And I was thinking, like, gosh, it would really be nice for that box to be opened, the new vitamin boxes to be put into their place, and then the old ones, pull out what's left, throw the box away. I was like, that would be really nice to have done. And I was like, wait a second, I do that. I do that, right? And so we want to come back as the male counterpart because,
Yeah.
whoa, how nice would that be? Or just to have a nice, clean, fluffy towel, right? And those are the things we want help with. But who's going to ask for that, right? Like, it just
No,
seems
I
so
know, it is so.
minuscule.
And then, not to throw my husband under the bus, but
Uh,
anywho, I will. But, he's like, "You just have to ask me."
yeah,
And it's like, "But you see me.
yes, it's a different
You
way of thinking.
you see me doing all of it. Why don't you help me?" You know?
Hmm.
He's like, "Well, you didn't ask me."
Yes, yes. And that's the thing. Well, like, so we need to delegate at home, which
Yeah.
at home should be our safe space, our space of being, our comfort and our space to relax. We're already into uncharted territories at work and being pulled in different directions, like especially if we're in a male dominated industry where just the gender dynamics are completely different. So we're kind of fighting a balance of showing up in this place, and then at home we have to do the same thing. And what we really want is we want there to be a sense of that, you know, caretaking to be something that has a little bit more equality. But I almost believe that it's it starts from birth to a certain extent. is that my husband, his mom was a primary caretaker.
Mhm.
My mom was a primary caretaker. Both did
Same with
not work.
us. Yeah.
Exactly. And so until we have, children that have been raised, men that have been raised to look at a space from a view that like you and I would look at. So we look at a room and we see things that need to get done, the general housekeeping tasks, until we raise a generation of men that are able to look at the systems around us. It's not going to change because it's so difficult to mandate, to ask all the time for it to change, for
Yeah.
their mindset to change.
I know. My kid, he's 5, and I'm really trying hard to like not have him, look at the world that way, and whatever happens in his life, I want him to be a contributing person to all these things,
Absolutely.
right?
Right.
So you're writing the book, you're doing all this research. What'd you find? Like, did you get any answers?
The two things essentially, we talked a lot about flexibility. The other side of it is that if the employer does not do something to address equality as far as benefits are concerned and really looking at childcare as being one of those things, then ultimately there's still going to be this exodus of women because it is so unbelievably hard. And whether that be from the beginning or later in life when we're going through menopause or we're caring for aging adults, we need help with this caretaking responsibility that falls on
Mm-hmm.
us. And so what I proposed in the book as a solution to this was just this rehaul of benefits as a whole, looking at how do we make our benefits be a little bit more flexible in the hopes too that it benefits individuals that aren't going through that same path. Like I have a friend that doesn't have children and she is super frustrated because she's like, well, when there is a maternity program, I pay for it, but I don't get to take a part of that. And so
Right.
really looking at how do we, if we're going to have workers have whole lives, then we need to also have whole benefit plans that support every decision that's under that can be reasonably supported.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. And I used to think about this all the time, at Netflix and designing and crafting our plans. There's people who want families, there's people who don't want families. And if you look at what's hard sometimes about benefits, and everybody's choice is different, right? So it's not
Mhm.
apples to apples. But then if you look at the bottom line, what I pay someone with a family is way more than what I pay a single person,
Absolutely.
right?
Yep.
When you add everything up, like benefits, and then is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's just really complicated.
So when we talk about compensation, we're typically looking at what that base compensation is. So I'm going to offer you 100,000 for your job, and that's your base compensation. And then all of these other things get added onto it or subtracted depending on what you're involved with. And the way that I talk about in the book, it's called these individualized benefits. And what this does is like it looks at total compensation first.
Mhm.
So ultimately if I as an employer expect to pay 125,000, then we work off of that. This is your base compensation and then this is the additional stuff that go into it. Some of that stuff is possibly mandated, less flexible, like a non-elective, like maybe a health plan or a 401k contribution. And then there's other things that could fall in the flexibility, and that could be maybe a flexible work environment, like you're not showing up to the office 5 days a week. Maybe you have a commuter plan. And I think systems are kind of looking at this, but it's more along the lines of changing the conversation from the beginning as opposed to later down the road when you're like, you don't even know how much what do I cost? What does my employment cost the employer?
Yeah, most people don't know. And
Mhm.
we always thought about it at Netflix from a total comp perspective.
Mm,
And that's how we looked at paying people. We never really looked at it as like, here's your base. We always looked at it as here's your total, right? And then one of the things that I think a lot of companies could think about, or maybe should think about, is letting employees choose. What I learned through compensation is that everybody's situation was different. Like maybe you did have parents who were aging. Maybe you did have young kids. Maybe you had kids that were going to college. right? And so what most companies had done, if we're just looking at like a compensation package, most companies sort of say, hey, here's your base bonus and here's some equity, right? And
Mhm.
so what we did was we were like, okay, we'll just give you cash. And if you want to have equity, you can participate in it and you get to choose how much, right? We're going to give you your bonus because we assume you're great, right? So what you would get at another firm, you can just have. And then you get the choice to see how you spend it. And then we ended up doing the same thing with like medical benefits, right? Everybody got the same thing. If you went over the allotted amount that we gave you to spend on benefits, then you came out of pocket just like you would at any other company. And if
Yeah.
you were under that, let's say you were a single person and you were under that and your benefits weren't as expensive, you get to keep what you didn't spend. And so it
Yes.
was, it was fair for everybody. I could go on and on about compensation, but what bothers me so much about compensation is like we've literally like talk about systems. We've gotten into the system of compensation and everybody compensates the exact same.
Yes.
Right? It's like, here's your base, here's your bonus, here's your medical, right? Like, rethink it, do it
Yes.
differently. You know?
100%. And my hope is that perhaps, let's give the benefit of the doubt, perhaps the resistance to this change was because we didn't have the systems to support us, or maybe the technology, or felt too hard and heavy. Maybe AI can come in and help with that, right? Like
Totally.
maybe we can say, here's what we want to do. Build me a framework for this, forms, the tech, the tracker, to make sure that it's even, because I do believe that if we don't address that, then it continues to be difficult for the workers. If we look at, your mom and pop businesses, they don't have the resources, even in HR department, to be able to communicate this. And so a lot of
Right.
times workers will leave, like especially in our industry, a worker will leave for $1 more. And you're like, well, you
$1.
have 100%.
Wow.
Yeah. And we're
Wow.
talking like trades, so
Yeah. Yeah.
laborers and stuff, because they don't value like a health plan. They don't value the 401k, not because they don't value it. It's because they don't fully understand what that value means. There's that language barrier that needs to be communicated. But when you're looking at a small organization, typically they're not able to communicate that. And so they're trying
Right.
to do right by having these systems in place, but they're unable to pay for, the full thing.
Yeah. No. And it's such a great point because I think, and what I also learned through my career is like when people, to your point, don't understand, right? Then they do get resentment or they, or they come up with like their own thing that's not actually true, right? About what's happening. If you ask somebody like how their bonus is paid, they can't tell you how it's calculated. They just know they get it. If you ask them how their equity works, they don't know. They just know they get it.
Yeah.
you know, so it's just so interesting. We always ask the guest to leave a little nugget of something for our listeners. So what kind of nugget do you want to leave the listeners with today?
I want to say that, we talked a lot about, stuff that we wish that would change, right? Like, maybe even perceived as complaining. And what I want to challenge the listeners to look at it as real issues, individuals talking about things that really matter, as opposed to complaining, and approach it from, if I was to believe that this was true for this individual, what would the world look like from their
Mm,
perspective? And how can I be a part of that? Because what I find is that we're so quick to judge or write off things because, well, maybe they're just complaining. And it's not the case. And I think women have been painted with that a lot. Like, well, you
uh-huh.
chose to have kids, right? Or
Yeah, your choice.
yeah, exactly. And it's like, if we look at it as we're all doing our individual parts to grow and be a community and move forward as humans, all of a sudden that changes the narrative. Now we're a group, now we're a team.
Yeah. Ugh, I love that. I have had so much fun with you. Will you join me in a career confession real
Okay.
quick?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, our listeners send in these fascinating questions to get career advice, and I think you
Okay.
are an excellent person to give advice. So, I'm going on maternity leave soon and only plan to return if my role becomes fully remote. It's already hybrid and I've handled remote work well with a toddler at home. I think I have a good chance of getting approval, but I'm nervous about bringing it up. A friend warned me not to say anything before I leave in case they just replace me. Should I wait until my leave is almost over to make the request? And how late is it to say I won't come back without remote work, without burning bridges?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's so tough.
so
So
tough.
I always lean into early communication, be clear, early communication. And I understand you're hedging your bets, right? Like you have
Mm-hmm.
this impending thing and you don't know how to approach it, but wouldn't you rather know early that your position isn't going to be remote so that you can make the proper plans if you want to change
Mm-hmm.
careers or if you want to maybe approach something differently with
Mm-hmm.
childcare. So I would say approach it as soon as possible. um, Communicate. Hopefully they kind of talked about they think it's possible, so that makes me believe that they do have an open and honest line of communication with their superior. So I'm hoping that they can talk to them and say, like, I don't want to leave this position. This is what I'm looking to do. Here is how I'm going to make it work. And I think that outlining that and showing that you have a plan will make
Mm-hmm.
the manager feel like, okay, well, there's a lot less ambiguity with this and confusion with this. I don't have to worry about you because you have got this under control already.
Yeah. No, I think that that is a very important part of your advice that I hope our listeners and this person is listening to. I think if you come with a plan,
Hmm.
right, versus just say, I'm having this kid
Yep.
and now I need to be remote,
Yep. Exactly.
right? Versus like, hey, I've been thinking a lot about this. I love it here, right? And I think I can continue to be the most successful for us and for you. Here's my plan,
Hmm.
right? Instead of, I think a lot of folks kind of, not that they would position it this way, but I think a lot of bosses or managers, if they feel like it's maybe an ultimatum, right? Like, hey, if this isn't the case, I can't work here anymore. Right. Then that just kind of shuts down the conversation. But, unfortunately, and I agree with you, talk about it early, but it is risky,
So
right?
risky. Yep. Well,
I mean, we just know that as women, like even like in my maternity leave, and I was a very senior person, I hadn't talked to my boss about it, who was the CEO of the company, but like he kind of said what it should be, right?
totally.
And
Mhm.
I didn't push back.
And I almost want to give a piece of advice to that hiring manager or that manager in this case that's receiving this request. Don't automatically assume that the individual that is asking this is because they want to skirt out on childcare or they want to just get paid to be home with their kid. They're
Yeah.
asking you for flexibility based on their tenure. Based on the fact that they still want to be a part of the organization, and how can you open up a conversation about this with benchmarks and KPIs that will allow you both to be on track? Because as the person receiving this information, as the manager receiving this information, we don't want to go down the path of losing them. We don't want to lose that human capital. We don't want to lose that person. And
Hmm.
there's nothing wrong with having a little bit of gap in employment. When you go on maternity leave, sometimes people come back refreshed and with a different perspective, and let's use that to your advantage as opposed to just being like, oh, this feels heavy and hard.
Right. I think that's such a good point. I'm so glad you said that because I think the assuming
It's us.
here
Moms
is,
have to figure it out.
yeah,
Mhm.
like you figure it out. Like, why are
Yep.
you putting it on me? And the assumption of like, well, they're just going to be at home with their kids, not working
Yeah.
very hard.
Yep.
Well, that they're going to be working harder than anyone, right? Like they're going to be doing their job and taking care of the kids and getting it all done, like you said. Because us women, no offense, men, because men are great too. We love you,
Yeah.
but women, we're pretty rad.
Yeah. Yeah. We get
We get a
stuff
lot of
done.
stuff done.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have had the best time talking to you. And I thank you so much for your time. I know our listeners are going to love this episode. Thank you so much. If they want to find you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm most active on LinkedIn, so Danaya Wilson, and then I do have the book Changemakers Wanted. That's available. There's Audible as well as a hard copy, anywhere that you find your books, and then my website's danayawilson.com.
Thanks for listening to Truth Works. This episode was produced by Megan Hayward. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.